Hi, my name is Lauren Rutherford, and today I'm going to be going over my ethics final assignment, which is on social media algorithms and how they have an impact on mental health. So, today we are going to be going over the overview of the ethical issue, some relevant facts, relevant stakeholders, as well as their values, the ethical issues themselves, resolution strategies, and the analyzation of them, and finally, the recommended strategy, as well as the second best strategy and solution and why it's the second best. So let's go over an overview of the ethical situation, going over the social media algorithms and mental health. So social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok use algorithms to prioritize content, which can lead to the proliferation of harmful content. So example, body image issues, self-harm, and other detrimental negative content, which then in turn negatively impacts users' mental health, especially among teens and young adults, so adolescents. So why is this the problem? So the key problem is these platforms are profit driven, with engagement being a priority over users' well-being, which cause ethical concerns regarding the responsibility of social media companies to protect their users' mental health. So let's go into some relevant facts. So I've identified 9 relevant facts that are backed up by research and like the research journal have back up by evidence. So the first being social media platforms, so example Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, use algorithms to prioritize content based on user engagement. So again, an example being TikTok, they have For You pages, so all your content is based on content you've viewed before, how long you've been on different content. So again, the algorithm is based off of a system not exactly regulated fully by other people, which can cause issues. Um, so these algorithms are often prioritize emotionally engaging content, which can include topics related to body image, self-harm, and other distressing materials. So a recent study done in 2024 showed that because the For You page brings up things that are emotionally charged and then things that they think the viewers are going to want, sometimes that can be good content, and other times it can be detrimental content that can have a negative impact on people's mental health and can be distressing in ways that it doesn't need to be. Um, so a study done by the U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory Board shown that there's evidence that heavy use of social media, especially among adolescents, contributes to mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. This is a major issue, especially with individuals and users at a very impressionable age where they are already dealing with a lot of charged emotions, and adding content on a platform that's supposed to be for entertainment and enjoyment that can be distressing can cause a major issue. On the next being, social media platforms have been criticized for not doing enough to address the psychological harms caused by their algorithms. So there's a study done in 2021 that has been proven and shown true in recent events, with TikTok, for example, being sued by and having lawsuits against it for the fact that its algorithm is showing negative content and showing self-harm and body image issue content to youth. So again, this is a major issue that has been occurring for a long time and has recently been coming to light pretty heavily in form of legal issues. Next is some companies have introduced content moderation measures, but critics argues these are insufficient in preventing harm. Again, this is one of the reasons that this is another element of a lot of the lawsuits and court cases that have been coming up, and is also a main topic of a study done in 2023. Um, is the fact that these content moderation measures are good, but again, sometimes they can be wrong. They aren't always accurate and they don't always catch everything, leaving room for uh, error, and this type of content is still slip through the cracks. Next, there is an ongoing debate about whether social media platforms should be regulated or held accountable for the mental health impacts of their algorithms. A blog post from 2021 that I had found that went over a lot of elements of different academic research and journals, went through the debate between, is it right for social media platforms to be regulated and held accountable, or is it just an algorithm and are people responsible for their own the content that they've been viewing. Again, it's a big issue that's been coming up as well with a bunch of the lawsuits with the different social media platforms. Another relevant fact is that social media companies argued that content moderation could limit user expression and reduce engagement. Again, a main part of the a main thing that we have to focus on is user autonomy when it comes to social media platforms. So it also you need to focus on the fact that advertisers and content creators can negatively impacted by moderations and restrictions, as their content may not be an issue but may be flagged for inappropriate content, which can detrimentally impact the people who are creating the content in the first place that are there for education and entertainment. Next is moving on to mental health professionals report increased demand for services as a result of the rise in social media related mental health issues. Again, tying back to the emotionally engaging content, the push for content that sparks in-depth emotions, having these targeted towards adolescents can be very detrimental and can cause a lot of issues that are very detrimental for them. And next is governments and regulators are considering laws to enforce stronger mental health protections on social media platforms. So again, this is something that we didn't have to focus on as much in the past because there wasn't platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, but now new laws are being considered to protect people and their mental health, especially adolescents, from being detrimentally impacted by these platforms. So moving on to some of the stakeholders. I identified 6 main stakeholders that I'm going to go through. The first being social media companies. So what do they stand to gain or lose? So they stand to gain increased user engagement and profits, which is why they exist in the first place. However, they stand to lose potential reputation damage and legal liabilities for not focusing on the mental health and the user well-being. So again, go a quick overview, the majority of these stakeholders have proximal interest and genuine interest, except for a one specific that I will quickly go over when I get there. So the next stakeholder is users, specifically youth. So they gain connection, entertainment, and information from these platforms. However, they stand to lose the most with it being their well-being, their mental health, and also as well as their privacy, which has been a issue in the past. Next is potential stakeholder of mental health professionals. They gain greater demand for their services, but they are losing there's a rising cases of mental health issues tied to social media use, which creates issues. As much as they are there to have clients, it is not a good thing for them to have those issues and seeing those and having to deal with those issues created by decreasing mental health because of social media. Next is advertisers or content creators. They gain to increase in visibility and engagement. They also tend to lose potential loss of advertising effectiveness as content moderation reduces engagement. They don't have, however, their genuine interest. This is the only thing that was listed as no with genuine interest, as they are in a little bit of a different position, separated a little bit from the social media companies and the users. Next is regulators, so government legislators. Again, they gain to have public support for enacting regulations. However, the loss is tension with social media companies if regulations are too restrictive. I'm going to content moderators, so platform staff or AI systems. They gain greater job security or Apache tools. Sorry, I mispronounced that there. And they lose there's an increased workload and ethical dilemmas regarding content moderation policies, especially if it's AI systems with the policies, and increase the workload, or if it's actually real people working. So heading to the stakeholder values, just to run through this really quick, social media companies, their main values are profit, user engagement, market dominance, and brand reputation. Users, their main values are freedom of expression, connection, entertainment, and privacy. Potential stakeholder of mental health professionals. user well-being, mental health support, ethical treatment of vulnerable populations. Advertisers, their values are return on investment, so ROI since they're content creators, user reach, and effective targeting. Regulators have the public safety, well-being, regulation, and accountability as values. Content moderators have efficiency, consistently, adherence to platform policies, ethical moderation, and ethical moderation practices. So moving on to the ethical issues themselves, the ones I've identified. The potential ethical issues, the first is the use of social media algorithms to prioritize emotionally engaging content, which may include harmful topics such as body image issues, self-harm, and distressing content. Social media companies' lack of accountability for the negative mental health effects of their algorithms, the tension between free expression and the need for content moderation to protect mental health and on social media platforms, and finally, the lack of transparency in social media algorithms, leaving users unaware of how content is prioritized. So why are these a problem? First being prioritizing harmful content for user engagement can exacerbate mental health issues, especially for vulnerable populations like adolescents who are already experience heightened emotions and issues already. Companies profit from user engagement yet fail to adequately address the harm their algorithms cause, violating their ethical responsibility to protect user well-being. Content moderation could limit free speech and engagement, but failing to moderate harmful content puts users at risk. And finally, the lack of transparency undermines trust and prevents users from making informed decisions about the content they consume, contributing to mental health issues. So let's move on to resolution strategies and their consequences. So the first is status quo, do nothing. The short-term consequences of the positive ones are that social media companies maintain high engagement and profit from content. So the values however, the negative consequence is that mental health problems, including anxiety, depression, continue to worsen among vulnerable users, especially teens. This has a major impact on user well-being and public health. However, a long-term consequence is positive of this ties into potential regulatory backlash or legal action against social media platforms. Again, there's that chance there's already backlash coming for social media platforms as a whole. So again, this could be something that continues. However, if this doesn't occur, the long-term negative consequence is continued mental health damage may cause a decline in user trust, leading to a decrease in long-term user engagement, as well as a decrease in mental health for users. Alternative one is to implement content moderation and restrict harmful algorithms. So the short-term benefits of this and positive consequences is improved mental health outcomes as harmful content is reduced. However, a negative short-term consequence is possible decrease in user engagement as content becomes more heavily moderated. On the flip side of that, long-term positive consequence is an increased trust from users and reduced potential for legal risks. However, on the flip side, long-term negative consequence is advertisers, which are content creators, may feel their content reach is limited by the changes in algorithms, which can impact their profit and their business interests negatively. Moving on to alternative 2, which is the implementation of transparent algorithms with user consent. So the short-term positives of this is users feel empowered and can have healthier social media experiences because they are more knowledgeable and they have more control of the algorithms and they actually know what's going on with them. Helps with user autonomy and the well-being. However, a short-term negative consequence is decrease in overall user engagement. Again, there's that chance that with a change in transparency, there can be a little bit of lack of user engagement. A long-term positive is positive reputation for user control and transparency, as well as better mental health and more control for users. Again, that is beneficial in that way. But however, the long-term negative consequence that can happen is a potential loss of engagement, again tied to the short-term negative, as well as advertiser reach as users limit content types. So content creators may not be able to reach all their audiences, which can affect their profit and their business interests. Alternative 3 is implementing time limits and digital well-being features. So the short-term positive of this is users are encouraged to take breaks, which improves their mental health. However, a negative of this is users may experience frustration or disengagement due to time limits. Again, it affects their engagement and autonomy as they're being told how long they can be on an app, not exactly being allowed to choose themselves. On the flip side, a long-term positive impact is reduced addiction to social media and healthier habits for users, as well as less likelihood of them being exposed to negative content. However, again, on the flip side, that long-term negative consequence is potential decrease in platform engagement and user time spent, affects the company's profit, the profit of the content creators if they're making money, as well as user engagement goes down. Alternative 4, which is increased mental health awareness and education. Short-term positive of this is users are more informed about social media's impact on mental health, reducing their harm. Again, this is increases their education and user empowerment. However, short-term negative is without changes to the content being promoted, users may continue to be exposed to distressing material, limiting the impact of educational efforts. If it's not tied into another alternative or content being adjusted, there's still a chance that people can be exposed to negative content. Long-term positive, however, is improved public perception of platforms as responsible digital spaces, as well as more awareness of how social media can impact their mental health. However, flip side, long-term negative is limited effectiveness without an algorithmic change to reduce the harmful content itself. Again, it's more of addressing a issue that isn't exactly the biggest issue, kind of sweeping the other one under the rug in a way. And finally, alternative 5, collaborate with mental health organizations. So the short-term positive of this is it provides professional evidence-based support for users in distress, helping them with their mental health and user well-being. However, a short-term negative is initial implementation costs for collaboration and tool development can be high, which again ties into the corporate responsibility and the cost, making it undesirable for these companies. Long-term positive, however, is strengthen relationships with users and external mental health organizations, building trust and partnerships, and providing the support that users may need. However, long-term consequence is this plan may face resistance from some users who see this as overly controlling or intrusive. Some people want to use the apps for engagement and almost like a break. So having almost a forced mental health element to it and breaches on their autonomy and as well as their user engagement. So let's move on to resolution strategy assessments. So going through status quo, do nothing. The moral considerations is ignoring the harm to users' mental health is ethically wrong as it sacrifices their well-being for profit. Prudential consideration, social media companies maintain high profits and engagement in the short term, but face long-term risks from regulation and loss of users' trust. How is this good and why? So this is a poor solution because it ignores the serious negative impacts on users' mental health and exposes companies to long-term risks, including legal action. Moving on to alternative 1. This option prioritizes the well-being of users by reducing harmful content that could negatively affect their mental health. There's a short-term decrease in engagement and profitability, but long-term benefits in trust and regulatory compliance. And this is a strong solution because it balances the moral imperative to protect users with the company's need for sustainable growth and compliance with future regulations. Alternative 2, users should have control over the content they see, and algorithmic transparency aligns with ethical principles of autonomy and respect for users. The short-term challenges with this with redesigning the algorithm and educating users, however, the long-term gains in user trust and loyalty as well as their autonomy. This is an excellent solution as it respects users' autonomy while addressing ethical concerns and has long-term benefits in terms of user satisfaction and trust. Alternative 3, it encourages users to take control of their social media use, helping them avoiding harm caused by excessive engagement. There are some loss of engagement and user frustration with limitations. However, this plan can promote healthier habits long term. This is a good solution that prioritizes users' well-being, though it may reduce engagement in the short term. The long-term benefits of promoting mental health can make it worthwhile. Going to alternative 4, educating users about mental health and the impact of social media is an ethical way to empower users to make informed decisions. There is minimal upfront cost for this, but the effectiveness may be limited without changes to the algorithm. This is a moderately good solution, but its effectiveness is reduced without accompanying changes to content moderation. It could be more impactful with algorithmic changes or combining it with other alternatives listed on this list. And then finally, alternative 5. This approach involves mental health professionals and organizations, which ensures the users are receiving ethical, well-informed guidance. However, collaboration costs and its initial efforts may be high, which can be undesirable for corporations, but the long-term benefits include improved user health and platform reputation. This is an excellent solution that combines ethical responsibility with sustainable long-term benefits of improving user health and trust, but it may be very difficult to get corporations on board with that. So moving on to the second best solution and why it's only the second best. So my second best is alternative 1, implementing content moderation and restricting harmful algorithms. Um, the reason it's second best is the potential short-term loss in user engagement due to reduced sensational content, which is often more engaging. There's advertiser dissatisfaction as the reach and visibility of their content may decrease due to restricted algorithms. This can be seen as more restrictive, limiting users' freedom of expression. And finally, there is less transparency compared to the other option that I am recommending. So as users will not have direct control over their content, even though it would improve user safety. Again, not addressing the issue of transparency. So my solution recommendation, why this is the best solution, is I am recommending alternative 2, so that's implement transparent algorithms with user consent. This respects users' autonomy by giving them control over the content they are exposed to, promoting transparency and trust. It addresses the mental health concerns associated with harmful content, reducing exposure to damaging materials. It promotes long-term user loyalty and trust, which can lead to healthier engagement and more responsible platform. And it balances moral and business needs. While there may be some short-term reductions in engagement, platforms can retain users' trust and avoid potential regulatory interventions while still being profitable and having that user engagement. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation on social media algorithms and the impacts of mental health. And the following are the references that I had that are also listed on my Microsoft Word document that I have provided. Thank you and have a nice night.